"You're done, Marcus." Karen's voice sliced through the hum of the cold storage monitoring station at 9:15 p.m. on a Thursday night, 2 days before the biggest FDA compliance audit in our company's history. And this woman who couldn't tell the difference between a batch record and a birthday card just ended my 17-year career with the enthusiasm of someone canceling a magazine subscription. I'm Marcus Hale, 44 years old, former Army logistics specialist turned director of quality assurance at Pinnacle BioFresh, the third largest pharmaceutical cold chain distributor on the eastern seaboard. That fancy title means I'm the guy who makes sure your grandmother's insulin doesn't turn into expensive sugar water before it reaches her pharmacy. I've been doing this job since before Karen Whitfield knew what a supply chain was. Back when this company operated out of a converted warehouse in Newark with exactly 3 refrigerated trucks in a dream, Karen Whitfield stood there in her designer blazer, tapping away at her phone like she was ordering DoorDash while dismantling my life. She'd been VP of Operations for exactly 14 months, hired because she golfed with 2 board members and had a last name that opened country club doors. The woman smells like department store perfume and unearned confidence. She has this way of smiling while delivering bad news that makes you want to check if your wallet's still in your pocket. We're restructuring quality assurance under a more dynamic leadership model, she continued, not even glancing at the temperature monitoring dashboard behind me, where I'd been tracking a $14 million insulin shipment crossing from our Philadelphia hub to regional distributors across 6 states. Your position is being eliminated. Effective immediately. Severance is 4 weeks. HR will send the paperwork. My rent payment flashed through my head. $2,200 a month for a 2-bedroom in Hoboken. My son Tyler's braces bill. The car payment on the used Honda Accord I bought after my wife passed 3 years ago because replacing her car felt like erasing the last piece of her from the garage. At 44, losing your job isn't a setback. It's a financial avalanche. "You're cutting me," I said, tasting something metallic in the back of my throat 2 days before the FDA walks through that door. "Because why?" "Fresh perspective," Karen said, straightening a bracelet that probably costs more than my monthly grocery budget. "You're too rigid, Marcus. Too many checklists, too many protocols. You slow everything down with your obsessive documentation. My son, Bradley, has a vision for modernizing our compliance approach, lean quality management, agile auditing." Bradley Whitfield, 26 years old, master's degree in business administration from some school I'd never heard of. 6 months of internship experience at a wellness supplement startup that got shut down by the FTC for selling glorified sugar pills as cancer treatments. The kid who asked me last month if cold chain validation was just making sure the refrigerators were plugged in. Agile auditing. I pushed back from my workstation. 17 years of controlled frustration pressing against my ribcage. "Karen, there's no such thing as agile auditing. The FDA doesn't do sprints. They do investigations, and when they find non-compliance, they don't give you a participation trophy. They shut you down." She held up a manicured hand like she was stopping traffic on 5th Avenue. Bradley graduated top of his program. He has fresh ideas about streamlining documentation workflows. Less paper, more efficiency, less bureaucracy, more innovation. He's going to get people killed. "Frank will walk you out." Karen gestured toward the doorway where Frank Duca, our night shift security supervisor, stood looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. "Frank's a good man. Served in the Navy. 2 tours. I bring him coffee every morning, black, no sugar, because that's how sailors drink it. His daughter has Down syndrome, and I donated to her Special Olympics fund every year. Now he had to escort me out like I'd been caught stealing office supplies. "I need to finish documenting the Philadelphia shipment protocols," I said, reaching for my keyboard. The monitoring screens showed real-time temperature data from 47 refrigerated containers currently in transit. Each one a rolling pharmacy carrying medications that people needed to stay alive. Each one requiring documentation that would satisfy federal inspectors in exactly 43 hours. "Step away from the terminal," Karen snapped, her corporate composure cracking just enough to show the steel underneath. "Bradley starts at 7 a.m. He'll handle the audit preparation." The absurdity hit me like January wind off the Hudson River. Bradley, the kid who thinks GDP stands for good documentation practices. who spelled pharmaceutical with an F on his first day, who looked at our standard operating procedures manual and said it was giving him anxiety. He completed an accelerated compliance certificate program, Karen added as if reading my thoughts. He's certified in Lean Six Sigma. I grabbed my jacket from the back of my chair, a worn Carhartt I'd owned since my Army days. Next to it sat my thermos, still half full of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. My reading glasses, a framed photo of Tyler at his 7th birthday party, grinning with chocolate cake on his face. You're making a mistake, Karen. The kind that comes with federal penalties and prison time. I'll take innovation over stagnation any day of the week. I looked at my screens one final time. 3 monitors showing the nervous system of Pinnacle BioFresh's entire distribution network. Temperature logs, batch records, deviation reports, kappa documentation. 17 years of institutional knowledge organized into systems that I built, tested, rebuilt, and tested again. Every protocol existed because somewhere, sometime, something had gone wrong, and I'd made sure it could never go wrong the same way twice. I didn't log out. I didn't save the Philadelphia shipment documentation I'd been working on. I just closed the monitoring software and left the raw data sitting in temporary files that would be overwritten the moment someone restarted the system. Like leaving a patient on the operating table mid-surgery. You sure about this, Karen? Completely. Now, please, let's keep this professional. There was nobody else in the building to witness anything unprofessional. But in Karen's corporate fantasy, she was already rehearsing this story for the board meeting. How she trimmed the fat, how she brought in young blood to revitalize the department. I walked past Frank. It's all right, buddy. Not your fault. I'm sorry, Marcus, Frank muttered, his face the color of a man being forced to do something that violated every principle he'd ever held. I really am. Nothing you could have done. The circus doesn't ask the audience's permission before it burns down. The walk through the parking garage felt like marching through a tunnel with no light at the end. Fluorescent buzzing overhead, the echo of my boots on concrete, Frank's heavy breathing behind me. I didn't blame him. Guy was just trying to keep his health insurance so his daughter could keep seeing her specialists. I was halfway to my car when my phone buzzed. A text from Jerome Patterson, our CEO, the man who built Pinnacle BioFresh from a single refrigerated truck he bought at a government surplus auction 22 years ago. Jerome wasn't a scientist or a quality expert. He was a trucker who understood that when you're hauling someone's heart medication across 3 states in August, there's no room for shortcuts. The text said, "Heard what happened. Don't do anything yet." I stopped walking, keys in hand, staring at the message. 3 dots appeared. Then, stay close. Something's going to go wrong, and I'm going to need you. I pocketed my phone and leaned against my Accord. Frank, I think I'm going to sit in my car for a while. Clear my head before I drive. Frank looked relieved. Take your time, Marcus. Technically, your badge is deactivated, so just stay in the garage. I sat in my car with the engine off, watching the garage security camera blink its little red light at me. I didn't know how long I'd have to wait, but 17 years in quality assurance teaches you one thing above all else. The worst failures don't happen suddenly. They build slowly, invisibly, like hairline cracks in a foundation. And when they finally break, they take everything down with them. I didn't have to wait long. At 10:42 p.m., my phone lit up with a text from Deepa Singh, our senior quality analyst. Good kid, sharp mind. The kind of careful thinker that Karen's restructuring would inevitably crush. Marcus, please tell me you're still nearby. Parking garage. What happened? Bradley's here. He came in early. Said he wanted to get a head start on simplifying the audit files. Marcus, he's deleting deviation reports. He says they make the company look bad, and the FDA doesn't need to see our dirty laundry. My blood turned to ice water. Deviation reports are the backbone of pharmaceutical quality compliance. They're legally mandated records of every time something went wrong and what we did to fix it. Deleting them isn't simplifying. It's evidence destruction. It's a federal crime. It's the kind of thing that doesn't just get companies shut down. It puts people in handcuffs. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Deepa. He also disabled the automated temperature alert system for the Philadelphia shipment. Said the constant notifications were cluttering his dashboard. Marcus, those trucks are carrying $14 million in insulin and biologics if the temperature excursions aren't flagged in real time. I knew exactly what would happen. Insulin degrades above 46 degree F. Not slowly, not gracefully. It just stops working. Patients inject it, thinking they're managing their diabetes, and nothing happens. Blood sugar spikes, diabetic ketoacidosis, hospital admissions, deaths, if they're unlucky enough to be alone when it happens, and biologics. The cancer treatments and immunotherapy drugs in those containers, they're even more fragile. A 2-dairy temperature excursion for 30 minutes, and you've got $8 million worth of medical waste that looks perfectly fine, but will do absolutely nothing for the patients counting on it. I stared at my phone, thumbs hovering. Part of me, the angry, exhausted, recently fired part, wanted to drive home, pour 3 fingers of Woodford Reserve, and let Pinnacle BioFresh choke on its own incompetence. But then I thought about Mrs. Chen at the Walgreens on Washington Street, who told me once that Pinnacle's insulin delivery was the reason she could afford to manage her diabetes. About the oncology patients at Street Vincent, whose chemo drugs traveled in our trucks. About the fact that pharmaceutical negligence doesn't punish executives. It punishes patients. I called Jerome. He picked up on the first ring. How bad? Potentially catastrophic. I said, "Your VP's son is deleting federally mandated records and has disabled temperature monitoring on $14 million worth of temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals currently in transit to 6 states. If those drugs get distributed without proper chain verification, people could die. And when the FDA finds out, and they will find out, Pinnacle doesn't get a warning letter. Pinnacle gets a consent decree. Possible criminal charges." Silence, then Jerome's voice, low and heavy. "I'm 20 minutes out. Don't leave." I wasn't planning to. I sat in that dark garage for 19 of the longest minutes of my life. At 11:08 p.m., my phone started blowing up. Text after text from Deepa. The temperature monitoring system just failed completely. Bradley tried to reinstall it and corrupted the database. We're getting calls from the Philadelphia hub. 3 trucks reporting refrigeration warnings, but the system won't log them. "Marcus, the contingency protocols you built aren't activating." Bradley renamed all the file directories. The automated failsafes can't find their trigger files. I closed my eyes and did the math. The kind of math they don't teach in MBA programs. 14 trucks. Average transit time of 6 hours. 3 already reporting issues. Without monitoring, we wouldn't know which shipments were compromised until they arrived at their destinations. By then, the drugs would be distributed tormacies. Patients would use them, and we'd have no documentation proving they were ever stored properly. $14 million in product liability, $50 million in potential lawsuits, criminal prosecution for distributing adulterated pharmaceuticals, and somewhere a diabetic grandmother or a cancer patient paying the price for a 2 6-year-old's arrogance. At 11:27 p.m., headlights swept across the garage. Jerome Patterson's truck pulled in. A beat-up Chevy Silverado that looked wildly out of place next to Karen's Mercedes. Jerome climbed out looking like he'd aged 5 years and 20 minutes. His flannel shirt was untucked, his reading glasses still sitting on top of his head. He walked to my car and opened the passenger door. "Talk to me." I told him everything. The deleted deviation reports, the disabled monitoring, the corrupted file directories, the 3 trucks already flagging warnings with no system to catch them, the FDA audit in 41 hours. Jerome sat in my passenger seat, staring through the windshield at the concrete wall of a parking garage, and I watched a man realize that the company he'd built with his own hands was being dismantled by the person he'd trusted to protect it. "Karen told me you were resistant to change," he said quietly. "Told me you were holding the department back. That Bradley had ideas that would save us hundreds of thousands in compliance costs." "Karen told you what you wanted to hear," I replied. "Because reducing compliance cost sounds great in a board presentation right up until the FDA shows up and finds out you've been cutting corners on drug safety. Can you fix this? That depends. Jerome, are we talking about fixing the systems or fixing the disease that infected them?" He looked at me. "The disease named nepotism," I continued. "The virus called promoting people based on who they're related to instead of what they know. The security breach, known as letting a kid with 6 months of supplement startup experience handle pharmaceutical compliance for a company that distributes drugs to 2 million patients. What do you want? I want Karen and Bradley gone tonight. Before I touch a single file, I want a written acknowledgement that they caused this signed by you that I can hand to the FDA if they ask why our documentation has gaps. I want full authority over quality assurance with a direct reporting line to you, not to whatever VP you hire next. And I want equity 3%, because if I'm going to save this company, I'm going to own a piece of it. Karen's been with us for 14 months. She's connected to half the board. Then call the board and explain that their golf buddies hire just committed multiple federal crimes, and the only person who can fix it is the man she fired 4 hours ago. Or don't call me and start shopping for a criminal defense attorney, because when the FDA walks in on Saturday and finds deleted deviation reports and unmonitored drug shipments, they're not going to care about anyone's country club connections. Jerome pulled out his phone, made one call, spoke for less than 2 minutes. Then he looked at me with the expression of a man who just swallowed something bitter but necessary. Done. Karen's being notified now. Bradley's being escorted out by building security. The board chair is drafting the acknowledgement letter tonight, and your equity will be in writing by Monday. We walked into the building together. The contrast between the parking garage silence and the chaos upstairs was like stepping from a library into a burning building. Every phone was ringing. Emergency lights on the monitoring stations were blinking red like a Christmas display designed by someone having a panic attack. Deepa met us at the elevator, clutching a laptop like it was a life preserver. Marcus, thank God, it's worse than I texted. Bradley didn't just delete the deviation reports. He reformatted the entire documentation server because he said the folder structure was too complicated. 17 years of compliance records, quality agreements, validation protocols, vendor audit histories, everything. The word everything hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. We reached the operations floor just as Karen was coming down the hallway, her face a masterpiece of controlled fury. She was holding her purse and her car keys, which meant Jerome's call had already done its work. "This is a mistake, Jerome," she hissed as we passed. "Marcus is a dinosaur. The industry is moving toward—" "The industry," I interrupted, stopping mid-stride, "is moving toward stricter enforcement, longer inspections, and bigger fines. The FDA issued more warning letters last year than any year in the past decade, and you just put your son in charge of making sure we don't get one. How'd that work out?" She opened her mouth, closed it, and kept walking. Some arguments end not with a counterpoint, but with the absence of one. We found Bradley in the server room of all places. He was sitting on the floor next to a rack of backup drives, staring at his laptop screen with the expression of someone who just realized the grenade they'd been playing with was real. His eyes were red. "I didn't mean to," he stammered when he saw Jerome. The system was so confusing. Everything was in these weird, nested folders with version numbers and dates. I just wanted to clean it up, make it more intuitive. "Kid," I said, kneeling down to his eye level, "those weird nested folders were a regulatory compliance archive that took 17 years to build. Every deviation, every corrective action, every temperature excursion, every vendor qualification. The FDA doesn't want intuitive. They want documented, verified, traceable, and complete. I was just trying to help. I know. That's the scariest part." Jerome pointed toward the door. "Bradley, go home. My attorney will be in touch about the documentation destruction." Bradley left, and the room got quieter in a way that had nothing to do with volume. The servers hummed their eternal hum. The cooling fans whispered their mechanical lullaby. Somewhere in this mess of blinking lights and corrupted data, the ghost of a functional system was waiting to be resurrected. If it could be resurrected. "Deepa," I said, rolling up my sleeves and sitting down at the main terminal. "Get me a direct line to the Philadelphia hub. Tell them to hold every truck at their current location. Nobody moves until I say so. Any driver who's already departed needs to pull over at the nearest safe stop and call in their last recorded temperature reading." "On it," Deepa said, already dialing. I turned to Jerome, who was standing behind me like a man watching surgery on someone he loved. "You need to call your insurance carrier." "Not tomorrow. Now tell them we have a potential product integrity issue affecting 14 trucks across 6 states. They need to activate the recall protocol and put a legal team on standby." Jerome nodded, pulled out his phone, and stepped into the hallway. Through the glass wall, I watched him age another year in real time as he explained to an insurance company at midnight that his pharmaceutical distribution company might have just lost control of $14 million in temperature-sensitive drugs. I cracked my knuckles and faced the screen. Green text on black, the language I dream in. The first thing I checked was the backup. Not the backup that Bradley had helpfully reformatted into oblivion, but my backup. The one that ran silently every 4 hours on a mirror drive that wasn't connected to the main network. The one I'd set up 11 years ago after a power surge nearly wiped our compliance database. And I swore I'd never trust a single point of failure again. I'd labeled it Marcus Paranoia V7, because naming your disaster recovery system after your most criticized personality trait felt appropriate. I typed the access command, held my breath, the screen paused. 1 second, 2, 3. Then, like sunrise after the longest night of your life, green text cascaded down the monitor. Backup integrity verified. Last sync, 8 p.m. All documentation archives intact. Compliance database 100% recoverable. Deepa looked over my shoulder and let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You backed everything up on a hidden drive." 11 years ago, I told her every 4 hours automatically, silently. Karen called it wasteful redundancy. Wade wanted to decommission the drive to save $200 a month in storage costs. "The one thing you're always paranoid about," Deepa said, shaking her head, "is the one thing that saves us. Paranoia isn't a flaw when you work in pharmaceuticals. It's a job requirement." The next 3 hours were the most intense of my career. I rebuilt the documentation server from my backup, restoring 17 years of compliance records that Bradley had wiped in 20 minutes. I reconnected the temperature monitoring system, recalibrating each truck's sensors manually through our remote access portal. I flagged the 3 trucks that had reported warnings, cross-referenced their GPS data with the temperature logs from my backup, and confirmed that 2 were within acceptable ranges. The third, carrying $2.3 million in oncology biologics, had experienced a 47-minute excursion above the safe threshold. "That shipment I told Jerome when he returned is compromised. We can't distribute it. It needs to be quarantined, tested, and most likely destroyed." "Our mean $3 million, Jerome said, rubbing his eyes. $2.3 million is the cost of catching a problem, I replied. Not catching it is the cost of a wrongful death lawsuit, a federal investigation, and a consent decree that'll make this company's name synonymous with negligence. He nodded. Quarantine it. By 4 a.m., every system was green. Temperature monitoring was active across all 47 trucks. The compliance database was restored and verified. Deviation reports were rebuilt with full audit trails. I'd even prepared a preliminary incident summary for the FDA documenting exactly what happened, who was responsible, and what corrective actions we'd taken. Transparency isn't just ethical in pharmaceutical compliance. It's strategic. The FDA punishes cover-ups 10 times harder than honest mistakes. At 6:30 a.m., I showered in the employee gym, changed into the spare dress shirt I kept in my locker, and walked into the conference room where Jerome had assembled the board for an emergency meeting. I wasn't wearing a suit, just my work clothes and the quiet confidence of a man who'd spent the night pulling a company back from the edge of a cliff. "The crisis has been resolved," Jerome announced to the 7 board members who looked like they'd been dragged from their beds at gunpoint. "Our documentation systems are fully restored. Temperature monitoring is active. 1 compromised shipment has been quarantined per protocol and effective immediately. Marcus Hale is our new Vice President of Quality and Regulatory Affairs, reporting directly to me." Every head turned toward me. They didn't see a tired, middle-aged widower with coffee stains on his borrowed shirt. They saw the man who held the keys to their regulatory compliance, the man standing between them and federal prosecution. "Mr. Hale," the board chair said, "can you assure us this won't happen again?" "As long as I have authority over all quality and compliance decisions, personnel included," I replied. Nobody touches the documentation systems, the monitoring infrastructure, or the compliance protocols without my written authorization. We're going back to the system that kept this company in perfect regulatory standing for 17 years. The system that someone called too rigid. Turns out rigid is another word for reliable. They agreed unanimously. Rigid was profitable. Innovation had nearly cost them everything. The FDA audit on Saturday went flawlessly. The lead inspector, a woman named Dr. Torres, who'd been auditing pharmaceutical companies for 20 years, actually complimented our documentation system, called it one of the most thorough she'd seen from a distributor our size. She didn't know that 48 hours earlier it had been deleted by a 26-year-old who thought compliance was a suggestion. I walked out of that audit with a clean inspection report, a company that would survive to distribute drugs for another year, and the knowledge that 2 million patients across 6 states would continue receiving medications that actually worked. Back in my office, the new one with windows and a door that locked, I sat down and pulled up the temperature monitoring dashboard. Every line was green. Every truck was tracked. Every batch record was complete. The quiet, invisible machinery of pharmaceutical safety hummed along like it always had because someone had built it right and someone had fought to protect it. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the thermos I'd brought from home. Coffee this time, not bourbon. I'd promised Tyler I'd cut back on the drinking after his mom passed, and it was a promise I intended to keep. I poured a cup and raised it toward the monitors, showing a distribution network spanning from Maine to Virginia. 47 trucks carrying medications to pharmacies, hospitals, and clinics where real people were counting on us to do our jobs right. Too rigid, I whispered to the humming servers and blinking screens. Too many checklists, too slow. Turns out when you're responsible for keeping people alive, there's no such thing as too careful. There's only careful enough and not careful enough. And the people who confuse caution with weakness usually learn the difference the hard way. Karen and Bradley learned it at midnight on a Thursday. 3 months later, I received an email from the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations. They'd opened a case against Bradley Whitfield for willful destruction of federally mandated pharmaceutical records. Karen was named as a co-respondent for failing to ensure qualified personnel were placed in compliance critical roles. I forwarded the email to Jerome with one line. "This is why we document everything." He replied with 2 words. "Thank you." I closed my laptop, grabbed my jacket, and drove home to have dinner with my son. Tyler asked me how work was. I told him it was good. Told him I got a promotion. Told him sometimes the most important thing you can do is be the person who refuses to cut corners even when everyone around you says you're too slow. He said that sounded boring. I told him boring keeps people alive and that's more than